Well, hello and welcome. And I don't know why I'm small, but I won't be small much longer. Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Exclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Exclusion and Restraint. And if you're thinking to yourself, hey, wasn't the podcast last week? We're usually bi-weekly, but sometimes there's just something that's happening that's special in the world, and we add an extra episode. And you happen to be in for a treat today, because this is one of those weeks where we're adding a special episode to talk about a brand new book that is out and just came out. Just came out this week. I got my copy on Monday by Dymond, and we're going to have Kara here join us in a moment. But before I get there, I just want to mention a little bit about who we are and what we do here at the Alliance Against Exclusion and Restraint. I know that some of you may be familiar with who we are and what we do, but if you're not, the Alliance was formed, oh gosh, it seems like 6.5 years ago now. And we were formed out of a personal journey, personal experience, and around the use of restraint and seclusion in schools, kind of led to a journey of trying to understand why these things were happening, who they were happening to, what we could do differently. The Alliance was really formed initially to look at punitive exclusionary discipline, outdated behavior management approaches, and we advocate for change. We advocate for changes in laws and policy, different approaches as well. And we do a lot of work around education. What are the better things that we can and should do? So if you're not familiar with the Alliance, be sure to check out our website. You can learn more about who we are and what we do. As I mentioned, I'm very excited to have our guest here with us today. But before I get to our guest, a couple of quick housekeeping items. One, if you're joining us today and you're already on live, and I see a number of people have already joined us live. If you're on and you're joining us live, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. And if you want to tell us more, you can tell us more as well. But it's always great to see where people are joining us from and who they are. And we see a lot of familiar names from week to week, every episode that we have. But I always love to see who's joining us. And in fact, Laura has already jumped in and said, I got my copy today, which is exciting. So Laura also has a copy of the book. And Laura is actually a volunteer here at the Alliance. And just recently, last night, started helping us with our book studies that we do here at the Alliance. So who knows, Laura, this might be a future book study as well. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. And again, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're from. But a couple quick housekeeping items. One, I just want to mention again, and I know I've talked about this on the website a few times, and we mentioned it on the podcast, but I want to point out to everybody that we're doing a really important research collaboration. We're doing some research with the University of Texas, Austin. We've got 2 interns and are working with Dr. Mickey Marinelli on a survey. And the survey is really around the psychological impact and trauma that can come from the use of physical restraint and seclusion. Really important research. You know, as we've been doing this work for a number of years, people sometimes will say things like, oh gosh, is it really traumatic? Or is there evidence to show that this is traumatic? And of course, I always look at them in a bit of amazement and wonder, as I think you doubt that being held down to the ground or forced in a room against your will is traumatic. It is, and we know it is. And we're doing some research now. It's qualitative research, but if you've experienced restraint and seclusion, and we're looking right now in this research study for adults that have had the experience, we're probably going to do a future study where we talk to parents and caregivers. But this initial project is really focused on adults who have experienced restraint and seclusion. And you can go to our website and learn more about this. And it tells you a little bit about the research team, why we're doing it, what the path forward is, if you've experienced trauma. And we've been posting on our social media details about how to take the survey as well. So I wanted to mention that. The other thing I was going to mention, and this is really just about supporting our work. If you are supportive of the things that we do here at the Alliance, we can always use your support. We have a membership option now if people are interested in supporting our work, where you can become a member for just $5 a month. We have higher level memberships as well, but those memberships provide funding to help us do this work. We are not a large and well-funded organization. We rely on donations and other work that we do. And just want to encourage you, check out our membership options. There are benefits that come along with those. And it really helps us to do the things that we are trying to do here. So with that, let's go ahead and get to why we are really here today. We are really here, as I mentioned, to discuss a brand new and I think very exciting book by Kara Dymond. I have Kara here with me, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. So I'm going to read your bio here. Karen, OCT, PhD, a late diagnosed autistic and ADHD advocate, teacher, author, researcher, and award-winning university lecturer. Of course, also a writer, and you teach autistic elementary students who have inspired your books. So this is not your first book we're going to be talking about today. And you earned a 2024 award for excellence in initial teacher education at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Ontario, where you teach graduate courses on neurodiversity-affirming classrooms. Such an important topic. I wish every educator had a class on neurodiversity-affirming classrooms. The good news, I guess, is that now you can, even if it's not a formal class, there's something out there for you. In 2025, you received the King Charles III Coronation Medal, a Governor General Award for service for your dedication to improving the lives of autistic people and their communities across Canada. You research the intersectionalities of neoliberalism, ableism, racism, classism, neuronormativity in education, teacher reflexivity, and transformative potential of neurodiversity-affirming pedagogy, where all are expected and welcome. And is the co-investigator in a study on universal design for learning and accessibility in teacher education. I can't wait to hear more about that. And you actually, on top of all these things, do have time occasionally to have some fun. And you co-host a podcast called Autistic Tidbits and Tangents. Hopefully we can put a link to that in the chat as well, along with autistic psychologist Maja Toudal. Maja Toudal, thank you. And autistic composer Bruce
Petherick.
Thank you. That actually looks like it sounds. Petherick. So I should have done better there. Listen, we're really excited to have you here today, and appreciate you joining me. This is a exciting week. It's always great to have people on that have written books, but what's even more fun is to have people on right as the book comes out. And this started appearing in people's mailboxes. For me, it was on Monday, but I know you had people that were beginning to see this kind of across the world in the past week or so. So it's really exciting to have you here.
I just got my copy today, so haven't leafed through it yet, but I'm excited to take a look later.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. You mentioned as we were preparing that, by the time the book actually comes out, it's been a year, it's been a number of months since you actually wrote it. And it's kind of like, okay, what did I write again? And you're probably, the challenge there is you probably already have some new thoughts and ideas, right? That come out as soon as it comes out. But absolutely really exciting to have it out. I just got it Monday, so I haven't had a chance really to dive in deeply, but I'm excited to have this conversation with you and talk about the book, why you wrote it, and what it's about. Before I do, though, just mention here, I see a couple of comments in the chat. Laura again, joining from Northwest Missouri. I think this would make a great book study. I'm in. By the way, I think we do regular book studies. We've been doing them for about 3 years. And in all seriousness, not to put you on the spot, but this might be a great topic for our book studies next year. And
I love that.
What we do is we do a 5-week study where we have our learning management system. People can log in and they can, kind of learn about the author and about the book. But then we meet once a week for 5 weeks. The last week, we ask the authors to join us and usually have about an hour. So I might be hitting you back up to say, hey, how do you feel about, doing a book study with us? We actually are finishing up, our teacher series. So we do kind of a general book study series. Anyone is welcome to join. But in the summer, we've been doing educator series. So we do them for and by educators. And this would be a really good book for next year's educator study, although I'm sure there's probably a big general interest in it as well. So Laura is actually one of our new facilitators for the book study as well, and a lifelong educator. We have a welcome from Iceland, and unfortunately I didn't get to see you when I was in Iceland, but maybe next time. Would love to go back. I had a little vacation recently to Iceland. It was a fantastic trip. So a couple people have jumped in and said hello already. Let's see. Teach with Your Heart. Hi, is the Alliance in Canada also? I'm Kara from her first book, Autism Lens. And the answer is yes. The Alliance is a small nonprofit. While centered in the United States, we have a number of volunteers in Canada. And we really collaborate and work with people from across the world. Honestly, we have a lot of individuals from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, kind of across the world. So we're always excited to meet and work with people all over the world in hopefully getting some change made. So let's talk about your book here. Creating a neurodiversity-affirming classroom. Now, first of all, the title, there's such a need for this. There's such a need for environments that are, not only welcoming, but really affirming classrooms. So why don't you tell me a little bit about, what led to the idea of this book? And of course, I know you've been in this space and in the education area for a long time, but tell me what led you to think, I'm going to do a book really focused on neurodiversity affirming classrooms. What led to this journey?
Oh, so many things, but the first couple that come to mind, of course, would be my elementary students, because I'm in a very fortunate position in the role that I teach. I work with students for 3 years at a time, so I get to know them very well. I get to hear their experiences at school. We talk also about home, things that could improve their lives in both settings. And every year as well, I have sort of a collaborative mentorship relationship with their teachers. I deliver in-services on supporting autistic students. And I always ask my students, what do you want me to tell your teachers? What would you like your teachers to know and better understand about being autistic? And, what helps you at school? And I just kept getting the sense over and over again that my students were being misinterpreted, not by every adult in their school, but it was a frequent enough occurrence that they were getting in trouble for asking honest questions, for being the one to point out, oh, that isn't logical, or that isn't what you said last week, and asking questions and then getting penalized in some way for those things. So that was one thing I was seeing. And this is also me having a positive relationship with their teachers. I always knew their teachers were well-meaning, but there was sometimes an understanding piece that I felt could be built, which I tried to do in the in-service and in our relationship. At the same time, several years ago, I began teaching in teacher education. So I was also privy to the questions of new teacher candidates who would soon be entering the field and the things that they were anxious about. And they often came in right away saying, okay, how do I manage behaviors? That was the number one concern, tends to be that. They know that entering the profession will feel overwhelming, that there will be many needs, and they don't know what to do. And they imagine there to be like a to-do list. If you just do these things, everything will be fine. Right. And, what I love about teaching is it is, as much as there are scientific elements, it is an art as well. It's a balance of intuition, relationship building, really getting to know the student, and then working in tandem with students to solve problems. And that's a hard thing to do as a beginning teacher. I didn't know how to do it. I got into power struggles in my first couple of years. And so I kept thinking, like, what can I offer to teacher candidates to help them to understand they are not alone to solve problems? They don't need to know it all. A huge part of this job is we are modeling being lifelong learners. I am not the same teacher today that I was last year or the year before, and certainly not when I entered teaching in 2011. Definitely, I am not the same teacher. We are always growing. We are always adding to what we do well. And so I wanted to write the book that could help them to conceptualize classrooms differently, where they, moving away from things like rewards and punishments, which are just such a ubiquitous feature of classrooms, but completely unnecessary. And I didn't know they were unnecessary for a long time either. I've had huge learning in my career, my own late diagnosis being part of that as well, seeing my students' experiences and just really wanting things to be different for them. And then I was able to design my own course. Like, what do I really want teachers to know? And that was my class on, I have two versions of it. It's the same class, but they're both basically on accessible education and classroom neurodiversity.
So in a way, what you were teaching in the classroom was beginning to form the foundation for what would become the book. And that was based on your own journey and what you were learning along
Yes.
with, kind of your own experiences and intuition. I love what you said, because this rings so true with me about, kind of being a lifelong learner, being curious, that where you are today is not where you'll be, in 5 years or whatever the case
No.
may be. I mean, in my mind, curiosity is at the crux of all of this. And
Yes.
when anyone, anywhere, in any role loses that curiosity, loses that desire to continue to ask questions and learn more, you probably don't belong in that place anymore. But it happens, right? I mean, there are times that people are overwhelmed and burnt out and don't know what to do. But I think a little bit of curiosity, can go a long way. Sometimes when we talk about these spaces, when we talk about education, and yeah, you're obviously in Canada, but I think the challenges persist whether you're in Canada, the UK, United States, Australia,
Mhm.
wherever you may be. We see a lot of similar challenges that are facing schools and facing educators, and that focus on behavior that you mentioned, very often is where so much of that begins. And unfortunately, it leads to a lot of those approaches that you mentioned that
Mhm.
are quite ubiquitous in terms of rewards and consequences, and
And
kind of.
punitive practices and
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And that's at the root of a lot of the work that we got kind of started on. In fact, it was really, our work focuses so much on kids who are misunderstood,
Mhm.
and very often misunderstood in the name of behavior. But if you go upstream from that, it's kids who are misunderstood because their needs are not being appropriately met.
Yes,
So
exactly.
in many cases, we're not doing a good job of meeting the needs of a lot of our neurodivergent learners.
Mhm.
And that leads to stress, that leads to anxiety, that leads to behavior. So, rather than trying to kind of deal with things on the back end by offering a reward or a consequence, which isn't going to do anything but give you maybe a short-term solution
Yes.
that's not going to work. It's about going upstream and creating those environments, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I love that, and I love how you tell the story of, kind of that experience, kind of leading to the teaching, leading to the book. So tell me a little bit about this book. We have a sense of the journey. What were you hoping to accomplish as you wrote this book?
I really wanted to have a sort of a breakdown of elements of the learning process, and some brain-based information of what could be going on for students at each part of the process. So chapters are divided into so there's an introduction that explains sort of my background and my beliefs and what to expect in the book. But the first chapter, for instance, looks at physical space, so physical and emotional safety, relational safety, the environment that we create, the ways we can create it. I always have some brain information, so I talk a lot about nervous systems, brain basics related to safety and survival. And then how do we expect everyone? How do we design our classrooms from the outset in a way that expects a variety of brains, bodies, ways of being? And then how do we create that sense of community? What are the things that we do as teachers that connect learners, well, not to their peers, but also to themselves? So how do we activate their metacognition, their thinking about their learning? How do we get them communicating with us what they want, what they prefer, what they need, what they enjoy, so that we can use those things going forward as we plan? So the first chapter is more environment, and then after that it looks at different parts of learning. So
And I just
Mhm.
want to interject, kind of on that first chapter. I love, and maybe there are people that are out there that are reading a lot of these books that feel like, they've learned some of this brain science before. But I love you have in chapter one, nerd alert, brain basics related to safety and survival. And I think it's such an important foundational piece to all of this. I'm a huge believer in kind of when you see human behavior through that lens of the brain and nervous system, you see human behavior much differently, beginning with your own and then to
Yeah.
those that you're working with and supporting. So I think it's such an important foundational piece of this is having some of that knowledge.
Mhm.
I mean, I found that shift alone can often get people moving in a
Yes.
much better direction. Have you found that as well?
Definitely. There are sort of two things that I think, and that research supports. helps with professional learning of any kind. And one of it is things like brain-based information. So understanding the why, the rationale, why something is effective, but also stories. So the impact, the things that make it tangible. And this informed both the book and the course that I created. I really wanted something that would help educators to envision what it looks like to do things differently, because it's really hard to implement things that are different if we can't imagine how it could work. And so having stories, and the book also has stories from neurodivergent students, neurodivergent educators throughout the book as well, like little windows into classrooms and experiences. But that's one of the reasons why the brain-based information helps us remember why we do these things, and the stories help us to have the emotional connection, the impact.
Yep. No, I agree. I think stories are so important and can be such a big influence. I've always said that if you can't imagine a solution, then it doesn't exist, right?
Yes.
So when you can't imagine there's something you can do differently, then in your mind, I mean, and I've met plenty of people that have been in their careers for decades who say, oh, well, I've done all these things and there's no other alternative here, just because they can't imagine it. And through stories, we kind of see what people have done. You mentioned the stories, and I know they're mentioned throughout the book. One of the things that I increasingly see, and I'm really curious on your thoughts here, but increasingly see, if you look at our organization, we have a really amazing group of volunteers now that volunteer to help support the work that we're doing. And those volunteers are parents and caregivers, they're teachers, they're occupational therapists, there's licensed social workers. We've got a really tremendous attorneys group of people. And what's been increasingly interesting to me is to see individuals that become part of our community and have, in the case of educators, for example, maybe we're educators that intuitively seem to know what to do differently, who themselves later in life are diagnosed as autistic or ADHD and autistic or whatever the case may be, yet had always kind of had, a sense of like there's a different way of doing things, and that kind of gets that idea of like lived experience. And so I'm curious, kind of as an educator, and I know that there are people that are whose stories are featured here as well. That connection between individuals who are neurodivergent and are educators, and the voices that they bring to the table. So I'd be curious your kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah, no. For me personally, I was always a good student, and one of the things that I really valued, and I was lucky. I had some great educators growing up. For the most part, I had teachers who gave me a lot of leeway and a lot of choice, so that I could come up to them and say, you know what, I don't want to write any of these essay topics. I would really much rather do this, I used to do skits and write plays instead of an essay. And I really loved having that freedom. And actually, I probably worked a lot harder than some of my peers, doing things that I enjoyed. And, little did I know that was part of being autistic, and ADHD is like, I can hyper focus and work really intensively on something if I'm interested, and it is painful and almost impossible if it is not something that I'm interested in. So I was very lucky that my experiences throughout were, for the most part, really positive, at least academically. But I know many neurodivergent adults who had, the kinds of experiences I know you work to prevent, and that I work to prevent, where they felt bullied by teachers, they felt left out of everything. They felt like learning was inaccessible to them. Then it impacted their self-esteem and how they viewed themselves as learners. So this is why we have to have these conversations to really get everyone understanding there's not just one way to do things. There's not just one way to be, and we can normalize for everyone in the classroom. I think if we start doing this when children are young, and we start saying, oh, well, what works for your brain, and what's, which way do you process information best? And it's not just most of the class is all the same, and then there's those few students who should be taught by special educators and their brains are different. No, everybody in the room has learning preferences, process in their own ways, and we can convey to everyone that there's just different ways of doing things that apply to everyone in the room. There's not a better way and a worse way.
Right. And not to get ahead of ourselves, but we'll kind of get there throughout the book as well. Is there are actually things that you can do to move in these directions? But I interrupted you as you were beginning to kind of go into kind of chapter 2 and talk a little bit about input, communication, processing. So why don't you kind of continue to walk us through a little bit about kind of what's in the book after we move past the the first chapter and dive into the brain science. What are you getting into after that?
Yeah, so after that, I kind of break down the learning process chapter by chapter. So I talk about input and communication and processing in chapter 2. So ways we can communicate more effectively as educators with different students, understanding learners can fall into various categories and planning with those categories in mind. So I say in the book, like, labels are not the be all end all. Labels have value, certainly, but even if you had 2 autistic students, they're vastly different. They're not the same. What's most important is actually getting to know your students. That said, I plan with 5 different domains in mind, which I think encompasses everybody, and we can move between these categories. And they are activated attention systems. So learners whose attention systems work differently, maybe are heightened, maybe they're hypervigilant, maybe they're attending to different stimuli than the teacher would like them to attend to. So understanding how attention systems work, alternative communicators. So making sure that there are different ways for people to participate and express their understanding than just spoken word. Specialized processors, understanding that learners will process information in different modalities through different ways, and how to build those in. Distinct decoders, which are learners whose relationship to text may be different, whether that's they're hyperlexic, they're dyslexic, they decode differently. Measured movers, so awareness of physical movement-based differences that may occur, whether that's someone who's on crutches because they've broken a leg, or someone who is very uncoordinated like myself, or someone with developmental coordination disorder. So those are sort of, if you plan for those broader categories, we can actually meet so many needs from the outset. So I talk a little bit about that in chapter 2, and how to enhance processing. In chapter 3, I talk about how do we get from the idea we've communicated, the new concept we've communicated, to getting students to deeply learn those concepts. How do we move from like working memory to deeply learned long-term memory?
Sure.
And a little bit about executive functions related to memory.
And if I could interrupt you for 1 second, kind of thinking back to what's in chapter 2, really what you're doing is laying the foundation for people to see and understand neurodivergent learners differently. And it's interesting because you bring up that example, like the difference between 2 autistic individuals, right? I mean the famous saying is what you meet one autistic individual, you met one autistic individual, right? But very often, I mean, at least one of the things I've found in education spaces and other spaces is that there's often like 2 images of what it means for somebody to be autistic, and they're very different and they're very extreme, and they don't represent the majority of people that are out there. So that different lens is really important early on. As you were describing what's in this chapter, I was thinking about the words of another well-known Canadian, Stuart Shanker, kind of the idea that I do too. He is such an incredible human being, and the work that he's done, but that idea of see a child differently, you see a different child. You're helping in this early part of the book for people to see differently and understand differently. Understand. You've got to build this foundation on understanding the different ways that people process and learn. And so often, a lot of our education systems become a one-size-fits-all, focused on compliance, and that's such a bad environment for a neurodivergent learner, or quite
Any
frankly,
learner,
any
really.
learner. Yep. You're anyway. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just
No, that's
had to think
okay.
about how in that chapter you were really setting the foundation for people to see differently. So I'll let you continue on with getting into chapter 3, which is how we grapple with the ideas to deeply learn, and this really kind of gets into executive function and strategies. So why don't you tell us a little bit more
Absolutely.
about what you do there?
Yeah, so again, this is more the how do we get students brainstorming, thinking about things, practicing things, working with the ideas, especially new ideas, connecting to background knowledge, and how do we support things like studying and note taking and things that we often as adults take for granted as things that need to be taught, but many of our learners will need those things scaffolded, will need those things. I don't remember being taught how to do a lot of these things. And I don't think it was till grad school that I really figured out how to write an essay very well. I was lucky I was a pretty good writer, but, it was always a bit hit or miss. My organization was terrible. And so how do we build these skills? How do we have mini lessons attached to the things that we do, and help learners to know what is important? Because that is one of the hardest things for neurodivergent learners, is like, what is important? I remember I had a student, he went away for 3 days with his class on an overnight trip, and they had to write a paper afterwards about the trip. And he wrote probably like a 30-page paper, and it outlined everything. When we got there, we put our bags in our bedrooms. We did this and this and this. And for dinner, we had this, this, and this. Like, it was every single thing that happened, because the instructions were probably vague and did not say what was a highlight for you or explain the most important part of. So he thought he had to write the minutia of the day. So just understanding how things can be processed differently by learners can really help us to be more targeted, to help learners to realize what is important. We can ask questions more clearly to get them thinking about things, and just understanding how to support working memory, it underlies and is so important to all of the school tasks that we do. The next chapter builds on that chapter, and it's more, how do we get things done? How do we scaffold and use universal design and plan units and tasks in a way where we're building capacity of students throughout. So by the time we ask them to sit down and do a project or do write a paper, it's really more of a celebration. It's a celebration of how much they've learned and practiced throughout the unit. And what that can look like, and also strategies that they can teach students so that students become more independent. I talk a lot about the problems that can come up when students are doing independent work, and how to do that both collectively as a class, to brainstorm before a work period. Like, what part of work periods is hard? What do you think are some of the barriers that might come up? Write it on the board, write everything they say on the board, and then talk about, well, what do you think we can do? Does anyone have a strategy for this? Let's write down the strategies we're going to try during this work period. What do you think is going to be the hardest part for you? And then afterwards, having students evaluate how they did, what came up that was hard, what they might try next time, so that you're always building these skills and their awareness and their understanding it's okay to struggle. Everybody struggles. There's no shame in struggling. And what do we do when we struggle? We talk about it. We develop strategies and tools to try next time, and we see how it goes. So I talk about how to do that in a variety of contexts. And then the last chapter is...
Well, and if I can
Yeah.
just stop you for a second before you move into the last chapter. Chapter 4 is a pretty significant portion of the book. And of course, you mentioned, as you started describing it, kind of universal design. But I wonder if you might take a step back for those that might not be familiar with universal design, and talk a little bit about what you mean when you talk about universal design. And I'd love for you even to talk about how universal design can be, and you were kind of talking about some of the strategies, but how that relates back to universal design, and maybe even talk about, in your experience, like what it's like to kind of really put universal design principles into a classroom, and some of the challenges that you might face and some of the successes that you might see. So could you talk a little bit more about that idea of universal design?
Yeah, universal design for learning is a set of guidelines. And I love that it's guidelines and not like, you have to do this, because, as teachers, we all have our strengths. Our classrooms are all going to look very different. It's a way of honoring the diversity within classrooms, in the, teachers, students, how they all work together. And it's the idea of designing from the outset, much like architects do for buildings, of designing how to make it accessible from the beginning, before students enter the room. So that's things like thinking about how the physical environment, how things are set up. It's thinking about how to invite students in, how to have different ways of participating, how to have different tasks, choice, flexibility, different ways of grouping so that you're teaching from different modalities, having your instructions not just be delivered orally, but you might record an audio note and have that on Google Classroom or whatever learning platform you use. It's having them, printed out. It's just thinking about the range of learners and what they might need and expecting that from the beginning as you are designing tasks, as you are going through on an ongoing basis. And as you sort of plan broadly, then when you're planning on a micro level where it's things like, okay, this afternoon I have to make some shifts. What can I do? You've already done the universal design, and you kind of know how it works. And then you can differentiate as well, which differentiation is sort of part of universal design as well, which is how you change things for specific students at specific times. But there's a wonderful organization called CAST, C-A-S-T, and they released a new guideline for universal design principles last year, and it's absolutely fantastic. But most teachers will be doing this whether or not they know this is what they are doing.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the example of an architect. And of course, what we both unfortunately know is that sometimes designing for all is an afterthought. And when designing for all is an afterthought, it's generally not very effective. And it often doesn't benefit all the people that it could benefit. And I think about this even through the lens of things like accessibility. And, accessibility when done well is about really making things more accessible to all. And, but people very often, I always like the idea, like more people in more situations, like
Yeah.
how do we make our classrooms more accessible to more kids in more situations, more individual differences. But I think one of the things that I'm a big believer in the ideas behind universal design for learning and the potential strength. But one of the things we sometimes hear is like, oh, that's just, I can't do that. I can't design something that's going to work for everyone, and that's just not how this works. It'll take too much time and I don't have the resources. So as you're, because some of this, I think you would agree, but sometimes it's a matter, I hate to put it this way, but sometimes we have to sell some of these ideas to people to help them understand not only the benefits, but that they can do it. And I know you talked about using stories to help with that, but when you have somebody that's like, oh yeah, I've heard of universal design. Yeah, it sounds great, but I don't have time for that. What kind of response might you give to somebody that, looks at this and sees the value, but just thinks that it would be impossible to do?
Well, first and foremost, I know, because I will go to professional development workshops and there's so many ideas and you're excited about them, but then it does feel overwhelming.
Yep.
So I always say, like, pick one thing to try and add to what you're already doing well. And then as you go, you can challenge yourself to get rid of things that aren't working, to replace those things. So not to bite off more than you can chew at one time, but really think about what is the impact on my classroom? What's happening there? What do I feel, could be better? What isn't quite working? If we really have to be reflective practitioners as teachers, we have to listen to students and find out what's happening for them. So each of these chapters also includes metacognitive prompts, things to ask students, to get students sharing their insights about what's going on for them, what works for them, what's hard for them. Because when you actually know what is hard, that is when our strategies become really targeted. One of the things that I kept finding was, as a teacher, we're so good at, and our hearts are always in the right place. We want to solve problems, and we're so good at hypothesizing, oh, they're probably having trouble with this, but we're often wrong.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I started conferencing with students and getting them to set their own goals and to self-assess them. And then I started asking them, okay, well, what part of this is hard? I was shocked some of the time by what their actual barriers were. I would not have
and it's
seen it coming.
amazing how often we fail to ask the question of the child that has the most information, right?
Yes.
And we make those assumptions. And of course, I have a lot of concerns around a lot of the approaches that are taken to things like behavioral assessments and the idea of kind of looking at antecedents and kind of looking at this very narrow pool of ideas about what led to a behavior that we might have seen that often then lead to an adult hypothesis, which isn't going to help, right? Because it's missing such important information.
And we'll have the hypothesis, but we don't want to have the assumption that our hypothesis is correct.
Right,
You always want to ask students, because they're so insightful about their needs, and there's ways you can do it without requiring them to articulate in spoken word. And the book has lots of different ideas for that as well. But I feel I use the analogy in the book too, that when we think that we know what the problem is and we unilaterally make a decision about how to approach it, we're hoping that we're going to have the impact that we want. It's like that game show gimmick Plinko, where we drop a ball and and you don't know exactly where it's going to land. And most of the time it doesn't land where you wanted it to go. When we work with students to collaboratively solve problems and redesign the environment, it is much more like darts. It's much more targeted. We know what we're aiming for. We're all aiming for the same thing.
Right,
and it's incredibly powerful to do that.
Right.
So,
well, and I love what you were saying about, this can be overwhelming, and, it certainly something seems impossible when you look at it from, okay, here's all the things that I need to do, all the things I need to change. To me, it seems the most valuable part of this journey is the decision to go on it and the curiosity, right? It's not about being able to implement 50 strategies on day one. It's about the mindset to say, oh, well, how can I make this, how can I make this better support more students in my classroom? Or what are the different ways that children might learn? So to me, it seems like that is really what's powerful. And over time, you'll get more experience with more people and learn more things. So, rather than looking like anything else, rather than looking at something like universal design as a checklist of all these things you have to do, understanding the principles and the ideas behind it and beginning by laying down a brick, beginning by doing something in that right direction, I think is so powerful.
And when we find something that works, it can carry forward next year and the year after that. And then we're just always adding and improving what we do.
Right. And it may not work for the next child that comes along that you thought it would work for, and that's okay.
Exactly.
A couple comments I just want to hit on real quick, just because I see a few comments in the chat here. Andrea says, great research and practical ideas. So somebody already diving into your book here. Laura mentions, I've heard that one size fits one. Yes,
Very
yes, one
true.
size fits one. Yes, I like that. I started to read it wrong for a second because I'm so used to that one size fits all. Laura again saying, I love it. Sandy sharing, I've always recommended a universal design approach when talking about trauma-informed neurodivergent affirming practices, because so many children are not officially identified. And when we know that trauma and neurodivergence are often missed, especially in quiet, compliant children, and particularly girls. So when you, here's the thing, you may know that there's certain children that might benefit from a different approach, but it's those children that you might not know are going to benefit from this different approach, and you're creating something that's going to benefit them all, right?
And this is, okay, I have a story for you.
Okay, I love stories.
In my graduate course that I teach, I also wanted this to be a course where I'm modeling what I'm saying, so that they're experiencing and able to envision what it looks like when classrooms are accessible and created with neurodiversity-affirming practices in mind. I teach accessibility tools. So every class I will feature, whether it's, here's a text-to-speech reader. I encourage you to listen to your readings and see if you process it differently. And so these are adults that I am teaching. And without fail, every year, There are a handful who come and say, oh my goodness, I used to struggle so much with readings. I would be rereading the same paragraphs over and over. I'd be forgetting things. And this tool, like the fact that you encourage me to use this tool, I've now found something that I can carry forward that really works for me. Because again, there are so many people who fall through the cracks. And to me, it is so problematic that we have systems where educational access is contingent on labels. When we know labels are gatekept, when we know it's really hard to get those labels.
Right.
And so I wanted to create a different environment where everyone is entitled to the support, the level of challenge, the level of choice, the things that are going to support their learning, whether or not they have an identification. So because again, I have adult learners who probably slipped through the cracks. Right. So, yeah, I really agree with what Sandy mentioned about, so many people being missed. So it really is about cultivating relationships with individual students and having a general understanding about how things might present, how anxiety could look or not look. And, even our students like me who were excellent students for the most part, when someone is really perfectionistic, I always wonder what's fueling all of their successes, because there's often so much going on below the surface. So sometimes our job is to get students to slow down. With my graduate students, I have them set goals, much like I do my elementary students. And, what's your goal for the week? And often I'm trying to get them to think about, my work is not my worth. How can I slow down and give myself breaks and allow myself to enjoy learning by creating space?
Yeah. Learning should be enjoyable. And unfortunately, many of our standard practices have taken the joy out of learning, and the joy out of teaching. I mean, I think it can go hand in hand. And
absolutely.
I from knowing you and the work that you do, I think you probably are a good example of this, but how the same things that you can do by taking an approach to designing classrooms that will support all different kinds of brains and different kinds of learners, you can actually in the process create probably a more joyful experience for the educators, right?
And it's interesting too, because I find my students, both elementary and graduate students, when I'm sort of shifting accountability to them. I have them do a lot of self-assessment and a lot of like self-monitoring, and I'm checking in and I'm coaching, but they are doing so much more. I'm trying to get them to ultimately be responsible for their own learning and growth and things like that. And while I would say initially it took a bit of front loading, it takes some planning at the beginning. I find that I'm in a really lovely place where I'm just listening and giving feedback and building skills, but I find it's less work than if I were to just be, how do I say this? When we're really strict about things, and this has to be due here. If you don't get it in, there's going to be 5% off per day. Like, I don't have to do any of that.
Right.
And it is so much more enjoyable for me to sit back and appreciate the different things and different ways learners are producing things.
Yeah. And what happens when that learning's happening because of the intrinsic motivation that's fostered by making something that is going to be more aligned with the way someone learns, right? Learning that makes learning joyful. And so often, I mean, I think of Alfie Cohen's work and things like, I do too. But even like, I mean, imagine a perfect world for a second. Imagine getting rid of grades and some of these things that we might do if we really were focused on learning. And unfortunately, sometimes we're more focused, as Alfie might say, on the competition, rather than, I
use ungrading in my grad course. So I only have to, I have to issue a final grade as per the institution, but we do our best to get rid of grades throughout. So it's all feedback oriented. And, the feedback on that is quite incredible, where they say they're working harder, but they're not focused on the grades. They're taking risks and trying assignments or trying things in a different modality than they normally would, because they're not afraid of there being like repercussions to their marks. And so they're understanding in their own classrooms one day, what are the ways we can reduce the focus on comparative thinking?
Yeah.
How do we get learners just to see learning as a process and to think about their own progress measured against themselves?
Love it. So back to the book, in chapter 5, you talk about how we plant seeds for change. So
Mhm.
talk to me about this, because I think, this is important. As people begin to go on journeys like this, somebody might pick up your book and get inspired and think, oh gosh, I can make some changes. And maybe in their classroom, they can start doing some things, but it
Mhm.
seems like an overwhelming task to influence greater level change. Talk to me a little bit about, kind of what you talk about here and kind of planting the seeds for change.
Well, a huge part of this chapter is use Ross Green's collaborative and proactive solutions and the impact that that has had on me in my classroom. And how fundamental that's been to my growth as a teacher to approach problems in a way that is collaborative, where I'm talking to students about what's going on for them. I'm open to the idea that there's something I can do differently or that I can change in the environment. And ways of developing our own self-regulation as teachers, because we're going to be triggered by things. There are going to be things that bother us. Sensory overwhelm is a hard thing for me as an autistic teacher, right? But knowing that I need to have strategies or tools myself that I can use and model, so that I'm not lashing out at students for
Right.
things.
Right.
But I can talk to them too when I need a break, students really benefit from us talking about how we self-regulate. I had a student once, he was probably about 8 or 9 years old, and he just kept saying, oh, I'm an angry guy. And I said, well, everyone gets angry sometimes, and I get angry, and, I use strategies. And he was shocked. He didn't believe me. And I said, you might not notice it. Like, the adults around you have had a lot more practice at self-regulation than you have. So you don't always see those processes. So it helped me to become a bit more deliberate in talking about strategies. It's one of the reasons I teach students, like the whole class. I will teach different self-regulation strategies, and I'll say, this might be something you love, or you might not like it, but let's practice it.
Right.
And then you get to know yourself better. You get to know what works for you. And then I know what works for you. And I can help remind you, or I can tell your parents that this worked for you. And so you're having those moments as a whole class, encouraging it on an individual level, and just changing the story we tell ourselves about students.
Yeah, I love that you kind of put the focus on, the adult, the teacher, Lori Desautel's, a lot of her work kind of, it begins with us. It begins with the adult nervous system, right? And as I was listening to you talk about, well, as adults, we have more, experience potential. But, there's a lot of adults that, I find it such a benefit when adults begin to learn about their own brain and nervous system and behavior, because we did not grow up learning about our behavior through that lens of the brain and nervous system. We learned about the horrible choices we made and the bad decisions we made, and that all of our behavior was a matter of us, doing whatever
willpower and motivation.
I went through a lot of relearning and self-reflection, and there are a lot of adults. I have hope for a future generation that we're going to have kids that learn about their brain and their nervous system and understand their behavior in a very different way, and that's intuitive to them, and they know as they reach adulthood, the things that they can do to help them if they're feeling dysregulated. But we're still a long way away from that. A lot of adults today still lack those strategies and don't understand even how contagious their dysregulation is when they begin having a difficult time. But you're in an opportunity working not only with children and younger children, but also with college, through your program, to hopefully influence future educators that are going to have this as part of their background, right?
Oh, absolutely. And they really take note and reflect on all the things that we do together and our well-being check-ins, and just the focus being on how are we all doing? How are we all existing and sharing space? And again, compassionate assumptions. We have so many ideas that we don't question as people in this world that have been instilled in us, ideas about effort, ideas about motivation or lack thereof.
Right.
And we're very quick to accuse people of not trying.
Right.
And, you know, going back to Ross Green's philosophy, a child, like a child who can do well will do well. And
Right,
a child
right.
who is struggling, like they're struggling for a reason. It's not a lack of motivation.
Right.
And I've worked with students who have handed in projects and they worked hours and hours and hours on it, but they had fine motor difficulties and they were told to put in more effort.
Right. Try harder.
They probably
try
put
harder.
in way more work than anybody else.
Right.
So just anytime we think this is a lack of effort, we really have to question that. We have to question that belief and then talk to the student. Find out what was going on.
Absolutely.
You know, I would so much rather do that and be wrong one or two times than the opposite. And really, get to know your learners. Sometimes school is not going to be their priority. They might have a million things going on. They might be working several jobs if they're a teenager. They might, you know, caring for other siblings.
Right.
Like there are other reasons why they might be struggling.
Yeah. I love what you were saying there. And I mean, you know, I've often felt like, you know, when you begin to see behavior differently and you look at it through a different lens and you can, you know, kind of look at a behavior, whether it be your own or someone else's, and say, you know, was this a stress behavior versus was this a misbehavior or an intentional behavior? When we assume intent, when in fact there's so much more below the surface, I think we can do great harm. But I don't think you ever do harm if you first pause for a second and go, oh, was that a stress behavior? Is there something going on below the surface that I don't know about? That curiosity, I don't think ever leads you wrong.
Exactly. And I'm a much calmer and more prepared teacher because I don't feel like I need to know everything. I know that I can ask students questions. I know that if there's a problem, I can approach them with compassion and say, I've noticed that you're struggling with this. What's up? Can you tell me more about that? How can I help you? And like it is remarkably freeing and empowering, and it is eons better than what often happens where when teachers feel powerless, because teachers are like any other learner and they have the same coping mechanisms, which would be blame, you know, oh, it's that family, or oh, you know, that
it happens a lot.
You know, but it's because they don't like to feel disempowered. But we give up our power when we blame other people. And we can actually solve most things, or at least start the process of solving, if we are prepared to have those conversations and sit down and find out what's going on. Is that everything that is hard for you in this situation? Let me write those things down so I don't forget them. Okay. Tell me more.
Right. Well, that's such an important question. Tell me more, you know.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many strategies you can use, and even just kind of, you know, somebody tells you something, you repeat it back to them, and, you know, kind of pause for a second and give them a space to share. I want to take a quick pause here. And if you are watching live and you have a question or comment, and we have a couple in the chat I see, and we'll get to those in a moment. But if you have a question or comment, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll get to some questions here in just a moment. But before we get to questions, I just want to ask you, kind of getting to the conclusion of your book, My Ultimate Secret Weapon. So I have to ask about that. Can you share a little bit? And you don't have to share too much. We want people to buy the book, right?
Yeah.
But can you share a little bit about your conclusion here in the book? And then we'll get to a couple of questions.
I probably have talked about it already. The ultimate secret weapon is really the power of teacher reflexivity and student reflexivity working together. So reflecting on what you're doing, having students reflect on their experience, and using that information to shape what we do and how we interact with students and the options we make available, learning from our students, because students are ultimately our best resource.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So a couple questions here in the chat that I'm going to get to. And again, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. First question here. What is your take on preparing students for life-given AI? Where are places in the community where students with autism are always welcome no matter what? Where are places in the community? Okay.
So some good questions. So AI, I mean, I need to brush up a little bit on AI. I think it's important that we teach tools. I do think it's important that we get students critically thinking about tools and which are best used in what contexts. And there's new research that's just come out about that actually show in the brain who learns most. So if you compose a paper with AI, there's very little brain activity going on. If you versus actually doing the work and the research yourself, there's a lot more activity. So I think sharing some of that with students is important, but also showing them what are the effective ways to use AI. AI can be wonderful for brainstorming. It's wonderful for translating things. Getting them to think about, when do we need tools like that? And what does thinking look like? And when do we need to show our thinking in ways where it's our unique thinking and we're not using AI? So how can we use AI maybe in the planning stages? And then how do you actually put things in your own words? That's something I find a lot of autistic students struggle with. I have to teach them how to summarize and how to, if you're rewriting an article, like, okay, how do we reword something? How do we switch the order of sentences? How do we use synonyms? How do, I give them some of those rules. So again, teach them how to use things, get them critically evaluating, does it actually help them or not? And how much did they learn this way versus that way? Like, I think any of these things you can teach. You just have to make the time to do it.
Critical analysis, I think, is important too. One of the concerns that I have is as AI gets better and better at, being a tool that we can use, is that that people lose some judgment. And think about how manipulative AI can be. If we don't question things that don't seem right to us. You can't take anything for granted. I mean, I think the importance of doing research and digging in deeply and questioning things is always really important. And AI is a increasingly powerful tool, but it's also at the end of the day influenced by humans that can put their own thumbprint on it and use it for whatever whatever means they want, and not all of that may be positive.
And not only that, like also teaching them that, okay, let's say you have an essay that's written by AI. You don't know that information is correct because it pulls from everywhere on the internet. Like, this does not seem that wise. So, having things like that help them to understand. But yeah, we always have to think about what they are learning about and what different opportunities they have than we had, because things will always evolve and be different. And we have to kind of have those conversations. It can be really, really difficult. Oh, Chantel had a great idea in the chat.
I'll read this. Very interesting subject. I read something the other day that suggests that maybe have students write a paper using AI and then critically fact check it and analyze that paper themselves to see how it truly holds up against the work we've done ourselves. That's
And the other thought that I had, just as we were talking about it too with AI, is, how the questions that we ask students to respond to can also influence whether or not they use AI. I really value with my graduate students I tell them, well, first of all, not having grades really helps. They don't feel like they have to use AI. But I also tell them spelling doesn't really matter unless it's a project, like a final project, but just in their reflections to me, I want their raw ideas. I want their personal connections. I want their stories. A lot of the time AI doesn't do personal connections, right? So I don't have an issue with that in graduate education, which is really helpful.
I have another question here. I hear a lot of similarities between UDL and Teach. Do you have, or do you think so too, or have you heard anything about that? Just curious. I'm assuming Teach, and maybe I'm wrong here. Teach, is that the methodology out of University of North Carolina? Is that?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with Teach. I've seen it maybe in a research paper here or there, but I don't know it well enough to answer that question.
Okay. Fair enough. And I was just trying to. That is a program out of University of North Carolina. It's an autism specific.
Okay, that's why I've seen it. Okay.
Yep. All right. Any other questions or comments? Feel free to put those in the chat. And I had one I wanted to ask you a second ago, and suddenly I've lost it as soon as I got there. But we are kind of beginning to near the end of our hour. So tell me, if people are interested in getting your book, where can they get your book?
Okay, so Jessica Kingsley Publishers.
Okay.
They have a US site and a UK site. Both of those are using a discount code for 20% off as well, which is Classroom 20. In Canada, UBC Press also uses the same discount code, Classroom 20. And worldwide, Jessica Kingsley Publishers. So she should probably honor that too. So the UK version will ship to anywhere in the world.
Oh, fantastic. That's really exciting. And of course, I mentioned earlier, this isn't your first book. Can you tell me a little bit about your prior book to this?
Yeah, my first book is called The Autism Lens.
Okay.
And I wrote it after numerous years in classrooms with autistic students, and the things that I was learning about them and from them. And there's even a couple of pages in the book where I had them say what they want teachers to do, what they don't want teachers to do, and lots of anecdotes and artwork from students. And it's really about understanding autistic students differently. It was before my late diagnosis, so there's a few things I would change in light of that, and just learning so much more as I've gone. But I think it's a really compassionate look at how to listen to children and really consider the impact of all of the things that happen in a school day and the energy cost that autistic students are expending throughout the day, trying to navigate social and academic and things that other people don't think about, that come more easily. So yeah, that's a bit more about autistic learners. I would change, there's like a half page on reward systems. I would get rid of that. Don't use reward systems. But and punitive practices, I've moved away from, the training that I had. I had a lot of training in applied behavior analysis, and I've thrown it all out the window and have really found having students select their own goals that they want to work on and self-monitor without me dangling a carrot has worked so beautifully. It was something I was terrified to do because I thought there's no way they're going to want to set and monitor goals. It has worked so much better. They've worked on more goals, things that are meaningful for them. I've discovered what's meaningful for them. We've had really insightful conversations about parts of school that feel hard and why. And I've learned so much that I've been able to carry forward and apply and use to help other students and other teachers to understand what could be going on for learners. So that would be, if I did a rewrite, that would go in there. But it's in this book. It's in this book now.
No. Well, I mean, it's all consistent with the journey you describe, which is kind of, I always use the Maya Angelou quote to describe this, but it's the do the best you can till you know better. When you know better, do better.
Yeah.
That's what this journey is about. It's about being curious. It's continuing to ask questions. It's, thinking about that book too, centered on the voice of lived experience, right? This isn't just kind of from an academic standpoint, me, being an expert. It's actually hearing and listening to and honoring the voices. But really excited about the book, and I'm excited to dive in and give it a full read, and would love to look at this as we're thinking about our book study schedule for next year. So might be hitting you up to see if you'd be willing to join us for a book study session.
Oh, definitely.
As we wrap up, I just want to give you an opportunity. Anything else you'd like to share, or any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us as we wrap up today?
I think the main things we've talked about, but it's just imagine what's possible in classrooms if we start so much earlier undoing the damage of the systems that they will be very familiar with throughout their lives. If we start early on letting them know their voices are important because adults listen and respond, and it's okay to need help, and it's okay to ask for something if it's going to help you. And, we're teaching them something that will be a very powerful tool the rest of their lives. And especially when we frame neurodiversity as something that includes everyone. This isn't neurodivergent versus, it's everyone is under the umbrella of neurodiversity. Like everyone's brains process, interprets, stores, thinks about information in different ways, even within a label. All of our brains are as individualized as fingerprints, and getting learners to think about and appreciate why, one person does something one way and they do something this way. Like we can really create a world where students become adults who understand accessibility and can advocate for accessibility, not just for them, but for others. So that's really my hope, is like planting these seeds for change through creating, generations that are more accepting of the idea that we can do things and think and experience the world differently. And it's not one way is better than the other. It's, they're all valid and deserving of support and recognition and being honored.
And it wouldn't hurt if we can get, schools and systems to shift away from competition into
Goodness, yes.
collaboration, right?
Exactly.
Imagine the strength. Imagine the strength, and you've seen firsthand in a classroom, in a universal design kind of setting where you are providing the things that different learners need to be able, and then the strengths that people bring in, based on their individual differences. We can dream. We can dream.
One last story for you. So with my graduate learners, I will teach some of the mini lessons that I do with my elementary students. And I taught a mini lesson inspired by Barbara Oakley, who wrote a great book called Uncommon Sense Teaching. It's based in neuroscience. But Barbara Oakley uses an analogy. She says that when talking about processing speed, she says some brains are racer brains and other brains are hiker brains. Racer brains are often like the fastest hand raisers. They're very quick to think they know where the teacher's going. They process rapidly. They have an answer very quickly. And then the hiker brains may take longer to get there. They're going to notice the bunny rabbits and different parts of the journey. They're taking in different information. It really is a slower but more nuanced processing. Hiker brains, the benefit of hiker brains is they are able to change their minds. They're more flexible because they take their time. They take in more information. Then the racer brain, the drawback of the racer brain again is like quick to jump to conclusions, harder to correct. For for making assumptions. And it's remarkable, even with adult learners, I would get reflections afterwards where they're saying, oh my goodness, I always thought I was dumb. I didn't realize, it's okay to process like a hiker brain. To be a slower processor doesn't mean that a person is dumb. It's just a different way of doing things. And, imagine if they had been taught as children, they wouldn't have grown up in the system, internalizing that as shame, being afraid to raise their hands because, they know that they're a few seconds later. We really have to not privilege the fastest hand raisers as much. We have to give everyone time to think and time to answer, not necessarily in real time. This is why I love like reflective prompts, because you can get a really wonderful answer. It just might take someone couple of hours to get there, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I can't help but think, but there's a whole other cast there aside from the the hiker and the racer. There's the explorer that's totally off on something else, but has
discovering amazing things.
But it's all these brains have value, and all of us have value and strengths, and it's setting up a world that's better accommodating more people in more situations with differences, our individual differences, and celebrating those differences. Yeah. Well, your work is fantastic. It gives me a lot of hope. It's great to talk to you. Laura said this has been amazing. Can't wait to dive into the book and share this podcast when it comes out. Thank you so much. And Laura, you might be helping with the book study for this now that you're on the hook for helping with book studies. Yeah. So hopefully we'll see you there. Chantel said, I think hypervigilance is due to trauma added to the racer brain in me as a child.
Good point.
Yep. Good reflection there. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here, but I want to thank you for joining me to talk about this book. I know we had met a couple months back and the book was on its way out, and I'm like, well, when it comes out, why don't you join me and we can talk about it? I really enjoy the opportunity to share the great work that's being done, and I think that curiosity that people will have that buy this book you know, it's helpful. And look, we already sold a book here. There we go.
Thank you.
Just purchased, and yep, Laura's interested in helping out with a book study as well. So we're going to go ahead and end here. I'll ask you to stick around, but I want to thank everybody that joined us today. And
Thanks,
as Laura mentioned, you know, one of the reasons we do these, one, we want to share this information, but two, I want to encourage you, you know, share. You have a favorite episode that we do, or the book that comes out like this. Share these with your friends, your colleagues, other parents that you might be connected with, other educators you work with. By sharing these things and amplifying them, we can make some positive change. So thank you so much, and we will see everyone again next time. And oops, hold on here. I see my, all right, we've got it fixed up in here. My outro was missing for a second, so we'll try that again. We'll